extremely fortunate to have a person of the eminence of Dr. Professor Sukhadeo Thorat to discuss some of the issues of inclusive growth in India. Sir, from the 11th plan onwards, inclusive growth has become a very, very important issue in the policy sphere. Can you just give some light on the concept of inclusive growth and how this can be used in the planning process?
Well, yes, indeed, that the 11th plan focuses on inclusive growth, and this has been further taken up in the 12th Five Plan. The concept of inclusive growth has come simply because we have recognized the earlier limitation of earlier model. The earlier model generally believed that if you focus on increasing the national income and the per capita income growth, through the trickle down mechanism it might reach to the poor, and as a result it will help to reduce the poverty and increase in the well-being of the people. Although the economic growth has helped, but the poverty coincides with the economic growth. So we increasingly realize that what is required is that not only increase in the growth, but how that increased income, the incremental income, reach to the poor. And we must know the ways and means whereby the increased income can reach to the poor. And therefore, we began to talk about development and growth in terms of outcome. And not only in terms of increase in the income, which is very necessary of course. Unless there is increase in the income, you can't share it, be either for poor or non-poor. So increase in the income is must. But it has to go to the poor, and it cannot go automatically, unlike the earlier hypothesis and model. You have to have element in the growth strategy itself, which will ensure that the income reaches to the poor. So concept of inclusive growth has come because of this new understanding, and in the 10th, 11th and the 12th plan we began to realize, and we emphasize that we will focus on type of growth rather than growth alone. We focus on growth, but a type of growth which will lead to increase in the employment and income of the relatively poor section. So inclusive growth essentially means that the income of all people increases, but within that the growth became more pro-poor. The income of the poor increases, their poverty goes down. And within the poor, of course, our focus is on the excluded and discriminated group of Dalit and Adivasi, now religious minority like Muslim, and among all of them the wage laborer classes, small and marginal farmer who are poor. So that is the concept that 12th plan really emphasized, that the inclusive growth essentially mean pro-poor growth, which will increase the income of the poor in the country.
Okay, sir. Sir, from the 11th plan, how this concept of inclusive growth is shifted to 12th plan when it comes to implementation? Is there any change in that?
Well, of course, as I said earlier, that we began to focus more on type of growth rather than growth alone, which means that we make investment, both public and private investment in sectors like agriculture, industry, service sector. And while we will try to increase the productive capacity of our economy, we also, in the context of the inclusive growth, we also see to it that the poor classes, marginal farmer, small farmer, wage laborer, petty producer, non-farm producers, how do we increase their productive capacity? So increasing the productive capacity and productivity of small farmer and the petty producer and even wage laborer is one of the strategy that we have certainly focused. But also we have also recognized that while focusing on these people, on their productivity, this may not be adequate enough, which operate through market and government in the economy. We also realize that direct focus is also necessary. Therefore, we have employment guarantee program. We brought a Forest Act. There are schemes which focuses on small farmers. So in addition to the enhancement of productivity of the asset of farm and non-farm, We are also focusing on certain direct intervention to provide employment and income to the poor. Of course, in the area of education and others, we have brought a concept of inclusive education, wherein we provide support and financial assistance to the poor, relatively poor section, and we recognize that they should get an access to higher education. So, all in all, what you see that when we switch over from 11th to 12th plan, we recognize that the growth would be pro-poor. Also, it will be such that it increase the income of the non-poor, but clearly of the poor. And in planning the strategies of development in agriculture, industry, service sector and others, we incorporate element in the strategy in a manner such that it increase the income of the relatively poor classes.
Sir, you were the special invitee for the World Bank consultative process on inclusive development. What is the international thinking on the concept of, what are the divergent views on the concept of inclusive growth?
Well, the inclusive growth has its own history, that it began with early 50s or mid 50s, that growth in income alone is important, which is indeed important. And the hypothesis and wisdom was that it will trickle down to the poor and help to reduce poverty, which happened, but which it did not happen adequately. There were many countries wherein income grew, but the poverty did not decline substantially. Therefore, the focus on pro-poor growth, redistributive growth, this new concept were put up in early 70s and mid 70s and 80s. And so, this is the realization that growth is not enough alone, growth is necessary, must, but you require growth plus. That is the word used by Martin Ravellian, that you require growth plus. So, it is this realization that we require type of growth, a particular growth which will increase the income of the poor, which has led to the concept of inclusive growth. There are differences of opinion in the World Bank. There is a one view that which talks about absolute concept of inclusive growth. An absolute concept of inclusive growth means any decline in poverty as a result of growth is a inclusive growth. It may be 1%, 2%. The other viewpoint is that no, the pro-poor growth has to be more tilted toward the poor, which means that the income of the poor should increase at a faster rate than that of non-poor. Then we can call it a pro-poor growth. And that there should be an element, strategy within the overall growth strategy, which ensure that the income of the poor will increase. Well, that is how the thinking in the World Bank has been. Recently, World Bank has also recognized one thing, and that is that, or in the process of growth, the poverty has declined. But within the poor, the poverty has declined more rapidly for some poor than the other poor.
So, social stratification is, classification is important. Different categories, different type of.
So, there are economically poor and there are economically plus socially poor. So, the distinguished feature that in many countries the government, the World Bank observed was that poverty declined, but within the poor, the group which faced discrimination and exclusion in the past and in the present, their poverty declined at a slow rate compared to their counterpart from a non-excluded group. And there then for last 5-6 years the discussion began that why is it that the poverty is consistently high among the excluded group and indigenous group. It is some type of a chronic nature, intergeneration nature. There they recognize now that exclusion and discrimination from having differential access to the market and resources and employment and education. There is a discriminatory access which aggravate the problem of excluded group compared to the others. And therefore, World Bank recently released what is called inclusion matters. That if you want to give the share to the excluded group and indigenous group, then we will have to remove the constraint posed by discrimination. So, that also differentiate policy is also being now agreed by the World Bank, and we of course in India in the 12th plan very explicitly mentioned that our focus will be in addition to the general poor on Dalit, Adivasis, Muslims, who suffered in the past.
So inclusion is inbuilt in the planning process itself.
Yeah, exactly. We are not leaving it down openly. Earlier wisdom was that let there be an increase in the income, it will reach to the poor or those who have access to employment. But now we say no, we will see to it that which are those elements which will indeed increase the income of the poor, so that we have a high probability of income being reaching to the poor.
Okay, sir. Sir, you mentioned about the role of employment.
Yeah.
Employment plays a very important role for any growth process in income generation. Now, can you just throw some light on the employment situation in the various social stratas and different categories in India, and how it is related to inclusion?
Oh yes, employment is of course very critically important for reduction of poverty. You must realize that if you look at the NSS data and estimate the poverty by economic and social group, then you realize that if you estimate poverty by economic group, National Sample Survey classify the household in 4 categories. That is those who have some asset, these are farmer and the non-farm private enterprises. So they have some asset, and then there is other class which is a wage labor class. That is farm and non-farm labor. Same is the story in urban area. In urban area there is one additional class called regular salaried, of course. Now if you take these classes, then you realize that the poverty of the wage labor is much higher compared to the self-employed. But there is other thing also, the poverty of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe is higher than the higher caste. Or poverty of Muslim in urban area is lower than Hindu. In rural area they are on par with Hindu, but in urban area it is lower. So you can see that the wage labor class and regular wage labor class in urban and rural area, and even small and marginal farmer who are partially wage laborer, they are the most poor. Now how will their income increase? Their income will increase if they get an employment. So I think employment plays a very important and crucial role for increasing the income and the reduction in the poverty of the most poor classes who happens to be the wage laborer. And that is why I think our employment guarantee scheme or NREGA is a well placed scheme. It promised to provide them at least 100 days of employment during a very slack and critical season where they don't get employment on the farm. So I think employment has a very important role to play, and that is why we talk about growth with employment, and we show a concern if there is a jobless growth.
Now, another critical area I feel is the education. The education is a very important tool for any growth process, any